Have you ever felt like you were the only one in a room who had no idea what was going on? That everyone else was on the same page and you're in a completely different book, right? I mean, we've all been there. Imagine knowing without a doubt that this was the case, that you knew with certainty that you were horribly ill prepared and your incompetence was about to be out there for all the world to see. Welcome to my first day as director of the university newspaper. I had been given the responsibility of training student journalists, giving them feedback on their writing, preparing them for careers in journalism, and I had no experience in newspapers. I had never written an article or even a letter to the editor before. So, my first day, I introduced myself to 15 students and told them I had no experience. I was going to be their boss, their advisor, and their mentor, and I had just openly admitted that I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But I, along with my board, gambled that I'd be able to figure that job out, right? So I told my students that I didn't have the newspaper experience yet, but that I was eager to learn from them as much as they could learn from me. I believe that those of us in positions of power have a duty to be open with those that we are helping to raise up. And I wanted them to know I was willing to learn. So I told them I didn't have that newspaper experience yet. Was that foolish to tell them that I was going to be doing this job for the next 2 years and I was in a learn by doing mode? I don't think so. I think that if we're dedicated to helping others grow, we have to be transparent with them about our shortcomings, our successes, and our failures. To me, mentoring is the most important aspect of my professional life. Now, particularly as a woman. This could be a formal mentor-mentee relationship, but much more commonly, it's a supportive, reciprocal relationship you have with a friend or colleague. We all have those people in our lives who call us for advice or who we rely on when we need some guidance. Mentors make us more successful. A 2017 study by the University of Massachusetts Amherst found that retention rates for female students in STEM fields were higher when they had a female mentor. These retention rates for women with a female mentor had a 100% retention rate. And while male mentors are effective, their students had an 11% dropout rate compared to 18% for women with no mentors. Women especially are encouraged to seek out mentors. We encounter unique challenges in the workplace. And I think a particularly challenging barrier to overcome, like Ambria said, is self-doubt or imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome causes us to discount our abilities and accomplishments and feel that we're frauds. And as an English major, I feel this fear every time that literature comes up as a category on Jeopardy! An article published in July of last year in HR Magazine found that 66% of women experienced imposter syndrome at work in the previous year. This compares to just over half of men who are less likely to feel that crippling self-doubt. And that number, like many blanket statistics, isn't broken down by age, ethnicity, ability status, or any other demographic. But I think it's safe to assume that different demographics experience imposter syndrome at different levels. Most of my staff at the newspaper were women. And as a woman mentoring a majority of female students, I took that responsibility seriously. I was up against social conditioning that discourages us from being proud of our accomplishments and where assertiveness often has negative consequences in the workplace. A 2011 Catalyst report found that when women utilize the same strategies as men to advance in the workplace, asking for more learning opportunities, more money, promotions, or responsibilities, it doesn't pay off for us in the same way as it does for men. We may get those things, but in smaller amounts, or it takes us longer to get them, or our requests are seen in a negative light or as aggressive. They found that the strategies that lead to the most success are making our accomplishments known and gaining access to powerful others. I read that as find yourself a mentor. If you're in a position of influence, get yourself a mentee and be transparent with them. Share with them how you make your accomplishments known or how you yourself sought out mentors. The tactics that women utilize to navigate the workplace trap us in this cycle of imposter syndrome. Socially, if we're conditioned to discount our abilities and achievements, it follows that we'll feel like frauds, even in positions that we've earned. Well, my job at the newspaper was one I earned without proven results. It's a different breed of imposter syndrome. But I couldn't discount my accomplishments because, at least in journalism, I had none. But I knew that I could do the job and I could do it well. And before you all think me unbelievably arrogant or entitled, I'd only felt that way because I experienced the worst case of imposter syndrome 2 years prior when I was in graduate school. When I started my master's in English, I quickly learned how much basic knowledge I was lacking, and I was blown away by how much the rest of my cohort knew. They threw out literary theories, terminology, authors, and texts like a massive, intimidating, name-dropping nightmare. And that, luckily for me though, my terror at the thought of dropping out was far greater than my fear and my imposter syndrome. So I used that relentless self-doubt to motivate me to read every article, textbook, and critique I could get my hands on. I essentially Hermione Grangered my way through graduate school. And that experience is one that I share with every single student that I work with. Every woman I mentor hears a version of it, because we all need to hear stories like this in moments of self-doubt. We need to know when others experience imposter syndrome, when that self-doubt creeps in. But we need more than anything to know how our mentors how they cope with it, how they've overcome it, or how they continue to fight it every day. Especially for women that we mentor. Women are more likely to experience imposter syndrome, and like Ambria said, HP found that women will wait until they meet 100% of the qualifications for a job before they apply, and most men will wait until they meet 60%. At a career panel a few years ago, one of the women speaking shared her story going after a job without meeting a required qualification. Dusty saw a job posting selling educational programming to sponsors or potential advertisers for a local nonprofit. Business degree required. She ignored that and went in with her master's in English and said in not so many words, "You think you want a salesperson, but you're wrong. What you really want is an English major, and here's why." She explained that the skills they were looking for were soft skills, public speaking, an education background, the ability to explain anything to anyone. And she knew she had those and was worth hiring. I was shook. I wanted to be her. She wasn't my mentor in any traditional sense of the word, but she was transparent, open about her abilities, and helped me, her unofficial mentee, pay attention to my abilities rather than my shortcomings. I recently worked with 3 women who were looking to make career moves. One has 28 years experience directing nonprofit programming. Another has 9 in IT and tech support. And the third one has over a decade in a medical office. None of them would apply for a job if it said bachelor's degree preferred as a qualification. Like many women, they discounted their combined 4 decades of experience, and their eyes went right to that one disqualifying qualification. I shared Dusty's story. I shared my story at the newspaper. Those looking for opportunities need to hear stories of women in positions of power who didn't meet all of the qualifications for a job, but still went after it. Feeling unsure of our abilities doesn't have to be a shortcoming. We need to use it to help others overcome that self-doubt. The majority of people have experienced imposter syndrome. Many of you in this room have likely felt it at some point, that you somehow snuck into a job that you weren't qualified for and no one's noticed yet that you shouldn't be there. I felt that way when I was nominated for this talk. Why would anyone let me do this? I keep waiting for them to realize their mistake and cart me off stage at any point. But just because we feel that way doesn't mean we shouldn't be there. I may have gotten that job at the newspaper for any number of reasons. They may have liked my qualifications, my dedication or commitment. Maybe they didn't want to do a full-on job search and hiring process. It could have been privilege, luck, right place at the right time. My fears could have all been true. But maybe I could take that imposter syndrome and turn it into an asset with transparency. As I've grown in my professional life, I believe that a lack of transparency causes far more problems than it solves. Advice I've gotten from older generations tends to be things like, keep your cards close to your chest, or be honest, but not too honest, or they don't need to know all that. I think millennials have lost patience with that. We want transparency. An article in Entrepreneur credits our valuing transparency with growing up in the tech boom. We have access to more information about companies, people, their brands, values, and practices than ever before. Transparency isn't a new value for us. We demand it in the workplace. It dictates where we spend our money and what organizations we want to work for or recommend. But in my experience, it's been a novel idea in mentoring. I mentor a young women's group of high school and college students. And when I started working with them, the high schoolers were all working on their ACTs and college admissions. These were bright and motivated students, and they were hit hard with imposter syndrome when their scores started rolling in. Students that scored higher than them flaunted their scores with classic sprezzatura, which ironically is one of my favorite practices dating back to the Renaissance, making the difficult look simple. This polar opposite to transparency has its place. I don't want to see Braxton Miller look surprised after his spin move against Virginia Tech. We don't care about the hours, weeks, and years of training that went into that athleticism. We want to believe that it just came easy. And frankly, outstanding plays, catches, and touchdowns are just cooler when the athletes make them look simple. But when we're giving advice to others, we shouldn't make the difficult look simple, especially when we're giving advice to women. When I heard these girls were directly impacted by those higher scores, that it directly led to their insecurities, I hated sprezzatura in that moment. No one's inherently good at standardized tests. You know, their classmates weren't disclosing how many hours of test prep went into those scores. And worse, these tests aren't good indicators of future potential. Many universities are removing the GRE and LSAT from their admissions requirements. Yes, thank you. My mentees were feeling less than over a test that isn't a good indicator of their intelligence, but more importantly, due to a lack of transparency from their classmates. But just like those women who discounted their work experience due to a lack of college degree, these students were discounting their abilities and potentials based on an arbitrary test score. These women were just juniors and seniors in high school, and they were already limiting their options, what schools they would apply to, because they were feeling imposter syndrome before they even started. We have to tell those that we mentor, supervise, or teach exactly how much work goes into our accomplishments and our failures. I tell them how many hours of prep went into a 2-hour meeting. I tell them that before a particularly terrifying meeting, I didn't eat for 2 days. And that, to feel a little more confident, in addition to all of the research, budgets, and reports I prepared, I put my hair in a Katniss Everdeen braid that day to pretend I was braver than I felt. And I think these coping mechanisms are as important to share with them as the preparation. You know, these things help us just as much as anything else does. Why shouldn't we do something that makes us feel more confident? If we want to help others rise, we need to give them as many tools, tips, and tricks to succeed. The students at my paper appreciated the transparency in our working relationship. They started to take notice of the tricks they use to get through challenging situations. They highlighted their accomplishments on graduate school interviews. They applied to jobs in schools they once thought were beyond their reach. And when our newspaper was in serious financial trouble, they took that transparency to the front page with an editorial titled, "Our Newspaper is Dying." It was great. That openness with our readers led to awareness to our financial situation. It led to donations, and it gave us another year of operations. Transparency, it seems, is in popular demand. Transparency with sharing our behind-the-scenes work is easy. As leaders, we all have coping mechanisms and strategies in place to deal with our daily tasks, challenges, and responsibilities. It's incredibly simple for me to show them my calendar or my overwhelming to-do list. I show them how I have to go to the grocery store in my calendar or I'll forget. It's also easy to share instances when we take risks in the workplace and it pays off, especially when it's less likely that we as women would take them, and even less likely that they're going to pay off. Dusty's story, in all seriousness, changed my life. I may never have gone after the opportunities that I have today if I hadn't heard of another woman taking that risk. And obviously, these women are out there. And we know that the men are out there. If we were all a little more open about these leaps of faith, I think that we could start to chip away at the imposter syndrome that's waiting to trap those coming after us. But transparency with our shortcomings is far more difficult. It's not easy to admit when we feel underqualified or like we're in a job or opportunity that we haven't earned. But sharing this feeling of self-doubt is crucial. I'm not suggesting that you put all of your weaknesses on your resume, but sharing some of those weaknesses and self-doubt with others when you're giving advice or when you're helping them through a difficult situation can, I think, ease some of that self-doubt. As leaders, I think we owe it to those coming after us to be as open, honest, and transparent as possible. They shouldn't have to overcome imposter syndrome alone. Thank you.